November 20th, 2012. Bentonville, Arkansas. A mother reaches for her daughter's bedroom door, expecting to hear the soft breathing of a sleeping child. Instead, she finds an empty bed, cold sheets, and a silence that will shatter her world forever. In 10 minutes, police will discover 6-year-old Jersey Bridgeman's body in an abandoned house just 2 doors away. In 6 days, they'll arrest the one person this family trusted above all others. The neighbor who babysat her. The man she called Uncle Zach. The husband of her mother's best friend. This is Cold Case Crime Lab, and this is the story of Jersey Bridgeman, a little girl who survived one nightmare only to die in another. Before we dive deep into this heartbreaking investigation, I need you to do something crucial. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. Cases like Jersey's need to be told, need to be heard, and need your support to reach more people who care about justice. Every subscription helps us continue investigating cases that might otherwise be forgotten. If you're ready to uncover the truth with us, to stand up for victims who can no longer speak for themselves, subscribe now. This is more than just a channel. This is a community dedicated to justice, to truth, and to making sure that no victim is ever forgotten. Jersey Bridgeman's life was marked by struggle long before that terrible November morning. She was a little girl who had already survived more than most children ever face in a lifetime. Born into circumstances that no child should ever have to endure, Jersey had experienced hardship from her earliest days. Her childhood, the time that should have been filled with wonder and joy and the simple pleasures of being a kid, had been complicated by factors beyond her control, by the failures of adults who should have protected her, by a system that tried but couldn't always provide the safety and stability that every child deserves. Jersey had spent time in the foster care system. For those who don't know, the foster care system is designed to provide temporary homes for children whose parents are unable to care for them, whether due to abuse, neglect, addiction, incarceration, or other circumstances. It's a system that tries its best, filled with dedicated social workers and loving foster families, but it's also a system that's overwhelmed, underfunded, and stretched thin. Children in foster care often move from home to home, never quite finding stability, never quite feeling like they belong anywhere. They carry their belongings in trash bags. They change schools multiple times. They form attachments only to have them broken when they're moved again. Jersey knew this life. She knew what it felt like to be uncertain about where she'd sleep at night, about who would care for her, about whether she'd ever have a real home again. But despite everything she'd been through, despite the trauma and the instability and the loss, Jersey was a survivor. She was a fighter. And her mother, who loved her more than anything in this world, was fighting too. Fighting to get her daughter back. Fighting to create a stable home. Fighting to give Jersey the childhood she deserved. And eventually, that fight paid off. Jersey's mother regained custody of her daughter. They were reunited. They were given a second chance. They had moved to a quiet neighborhood in Bentonville, Arkansas, a city in the northwestern corner of the state, part of the rapidly growing Northwest Arkansas region. Bentonville is perhaps best known as the home of Walmart's headquarters, a city that had been transformed from a small town into a thriving community. It seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start, for safety, for normalcy, for all the things that Jersey and her mother had been desperately seeking. Their neighborhood was the kind of place where people knew each other, where children played in the yards, where neighbors waved to each other and looked out for one another. It was exactly what Jersey's mother had hoped for. A safe community. A place where Jersey could finally just be a kid. And for a while, it seemed like they'd found exactly that. Their neighbors, Zachary Holly and his wife, quickly became close friends with Jersey's family. This wasn't just a casual, wave when you see each other in the driveway kind of relationship. These families became genuinely close. Zachary's wife and Jersey's mother developed a deep friendship, the kind where you're constantly texting, where you share your struggles and your joys, where you consider each other not just neighbors but true friends. They spent time together as families. They had dinners together. They celebrated birthdays and holidays together. Their homes became extensions of each other. And Zachary Holly seemed like exactly the kind of person you'd want as a neighbor. He was 28 years old, married, seemingly stable and trustworthy. He was friendly, helpful, the kind of guy who'd lend you a tool or help you move furniture. He integrated himself into Jersey's life in a way that seemed completely natural and appropriate. He was Uncle Zach. That's what Jersey called him. Not Mr. Holly, not Zachary, but Uncle Zach, a title that signified trust, affection, and family bonds. When Jersey's mother needed someone to watch her daughter, Zachary was there. He babysat Jersey regularly. This wasn't a professional arrangement with a daycare or a hired babysitter who was vetted and trained. This was a neighbor, a friend, someone the family trusted implicitly. Jersey knew him. She was comfortable with him. She trusted him. In her young mind, Uncle Zach was safe. He was family. And Jersey's mother believed that too. She had no reason not to. Everything about Zachary Holly seemed normal, trustworthy, safe. This is one of the most terrifying aspects of cases like Jersey's. The monsters in these stories don't look like monsters. They don't have horns or fangs or anything that would warn us away. They look like us. They look like neighbors and friends and family members. They're integrated into our communities in ways that make them seem beyond suspicion. They build trust over time, creating relationships that become armor against doubt. When something goes wrong, when suspicions arise, we resist believing it because we think we know them. We think we'd be able to tell if someone was dangerous. We think evil would be obvious. But it's not. Evil hides in plain sight. Evil knows how to smile and wave and offer to babysit your children. On the night of November 19, 2012, Jersey went to bed in what should have been the absolute safety of her own home. It was a Monday night, an ordinary evening in an ordinary week. Jersey's mother went through the familiar routine that parents everywhere know so well. Bath time, pajamas, maybe a bedtime story, tucking in, a kiss goodnight. These are the small rituals that mark the end of each day, the moments that children depend on, the routines that create security and comfort. Jersey's mother tucked her daughter into bed, kissed her goodnight, told her she loved her, and closed the door, never imagining, never even considering the possibility that it would be the last time she'd see her daughter alive. What happened in the hours that followed remains partially known through investigation and partially shrouded in the darkness of that November night. What we know is that at some point between Jersey being tucked into bed and the morning when her mother discovered she was missing, someone entered that house. Someone took Jersey from her bed. Someone carried her out of her home, out of the place where she should have been safest, and into the cold November night. The next morning, November 20th, Jersey's mother woke up and went through the motions of starting another day. She probably had coffee brewing, maybe was thinking about breakfast, about getting Jersey ready for the day ahead. She walked into her daughter's bedroom to wake her, expecting to see Jersey curled up under the covers, maybe still deep in sleep, maybe already stirring and rubbing her eyes. Instead, she found an empty bed. The covers were pulled back. Jersey wasn't there. At first, there might have been a moment of confusion rather than panic. Maybe Jersey had gotten up early and was in another room. Maybe she was in the bathroom or had gone to the kitchen looking for breakfast. But as Jersey's mother called out her daughter's name and received no response, as she moved from room to room and found no trace of her daughter, the confusion transformed into something much darker. Fear. The kind of fear that grips your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The kind of fear that every parent has nightmares about but never truly believes will happen to them. She searched every room of the house, moving faster now, her voice rising as she called Jersey's name over and over. She checked closets, looked under beds, searched the basement if they had one, checked the backyard, looked in the garage, anywhere and everywhere a 6-year-old might be. But there was no answer. No giggling from a hiding spot. No little girl running out from behind a door. Just silence. Empty rooms. An empty house. and the growing, terrible certainty that something was horribly wrong. Jersey's mother's mind must have been racing. Had Jersey wandered outside? Had she somehow left the house on her own? 6-year-olds are curious, sometimes unpredictable, but Jersey had no history of wandering off. And even if she had left the house, where would she go? It was early morning. It was cold. Nothing about this made sense. The wrongness of it all, the absolute wrongness, must have been overwhelming. At 7:43 in the morning, Jersey's mother called 911. Her voice on that call, which would later become part of the official record, captured the raw terror of a mother who knows something terrible has happened to her child. Emergency dispatchers immediately sent police to the address. In situations involving missing children, every second matters. The first few hours are absolutely critical. Response times can mean the difference between life and death, between finding a child who's simply lost and finding a child who's been taken. Bentonville police arrived within minutes of the call. Officers immediately began a systematic search, following protocols designed for exactly this kind of emergency. They started with the house itself, conducting a thorough search to absolutely confirm that Jersey wasn't somewhere in the home, hidden or trapped or hurt. They checked every room, every closet, every space large enough for a child to fit. They looked in places that Jersey's mother had already searched, double-checking, triple-checking, because you can never be too careful when a child's life is at stake. When they were certain Jersey wasn't in the house, they expanded their search to the immediate surroundings. Officers spread out through the neighborhood, moving quickly but methodically. They checked the yard, the surrounding yards, the street, looking for any sign of Jersey, any indication of where she might have gone or been taken. They knocked on doors, waking neighbors who were just starting their day, asking if anyone had seen Jersey, if anyone had heard anything unusual during the night, if anyone had any information at all that might help locate this missing 6-year-old girl. Additional units were called in. The more officers searching, the more ground they could cover, and the better the chances of finding Jersey quickly. Police checked garages and sheds, looked in parked cars, searched nearby parks and playgrounds. They were working against time, driven by the knowledge that the longer a child is missing, the worse the potential outcome becomes. Neighbors joined the search as word spread through the community. People came out of their houses, abandoning their morning routines to help look for Jersey. They called her name. They searched their own properties more thoroughly. They shared information with police about anything they might have seen or heard. The community was mobilizing, coming together in the face of every parent's worst nightmare. Then, just 2 houses down from Jersey's home, officers approached a vacant property. The house had been sitting empty, one of those properties that exists in many neighborhoods, waiting to be sold or rented, slowly falling into disrepair. The windows were dark. The yard was overgrown. The doors were unlocked, which wasn't unusual for an abandoned property but was certainly concerning in this situation. Officers entered the vacant house, calling Jersey's name, hoping desperately that maybe she had wandered in here, that maybe she was just scared and hiding, that maybe this would end with a frightened but safe little girl being carried home to her mother. But that's not what they found. Inside that house, in the cold and the silence and the darkness of that abandoned space, they found Jersey Bridgeman. And she was dead. The little girl who had survived so much, who was finally building a life with her mother, who should have been safe in her own neighborhood, in her own home, just 2 houses away from where she should have been waking up to another day, was gone. The worst possible outcome of a missing child case had come to pass. Jersey hadn't wandered off. She hadn't gotten lost. She had been taken from her home and murdered. The scene inside that vacant house became a crime scene. Officers immediately secured the area, making sure nothing was disturbed, that no evidence was contaminated or destroyed. Crime scene tape went up. The search for a missing child had transformed into a homicide investigation. Detectives were called in. The medical examiner was notified. Forensic specialists began the careful, methodical work of processing the scene, photographing everything, collecting evidence, documenting every detail that might help explain what had happened to Jersey and who was responsible. Jersey's mother, waiting at home, surrounded by police officers and probably friends or family who had rushed over when they heard Jersey was missing, received the news that no parent should ever have to hear. "Your child is dead." Those words, that reality, must have been absolutely devastating. The hope that had sustained her through the search, the desperate belief that Jersey would be found safe, was shattered. Her daughter, her baby, the little girl she had fought so hard to protect and provide for, was gone. The medical examiner would later conduct an autopsy to determine the exact cause of Jersey's death. Without going into graphic details that would be disrespectful to Jersey's memory and traumatizing to imagine, what was clear was that Jersey had been murdered. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragic case of a child wandering off and getting hurt. Someone had intentionally taken Jersey's life. Someone had killed a 6-year-old girl. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Jersey's case is difficult to hear about, difficult to process, but it's important that we don't look away. These stories matter. These victims matter. And Jersey deserves to have her story told. Detectives immediately launched a full homicide investigation. The lead investigators assigned to Jersey's case knew they were dealing with one of the most serious crimes possible, the murder of a child, and they were determined to find whoever was responsible and bring them to justice. They began by processing the crime scene in meticulous detail. Every fiber, every fingerprint, every possible piece of physical evidence was collected and catalogued. The vacant house was examined from top to bottom. Forensic specialists documented everything, taking hundreds of photographs, creating diagrams, making sure that nothing was missed. Simultaneously, detectives began conducting interviews. They spoke with Jersey's mother, going through the timeline of the previous evening and night. When had she last seen Jersey? Had anything seemed unusual? Had there been any strangers in the neighborhood? Any suspicious vehicles or people? Any threats or concerns? These questions, while necessary for the investigation, must have been agonizing for Jersey's mother, having to relive those last moments with her daughter while grappling with the knowledge that Jersey was gone. Investigators interviewed neighbors throughout the area. Had anyone seen or heard anything unusual during the night? Had anyone noticed any activity around the vacant house? Were there any people in the neighborhood who didn't belong, any unfamiliar faces or vehicles? In cases like this, seemingly insignificant details can become crucial pieces of evidence. A neighbor who heard a car door slam at an unusual hour. Someone who saw lights on in the vacant house. A dog that barked persistently during the night. All of these details get collected and analyzed, pieced together like a puzzle to create a picture of what happened. Detectives also began constructing a timeline. When exactly had Jersey been taken from her home? The window of time was between when her mother tucked her in and when she discovered Jersey missing in the morning. That left several hours, but narrowing down that time frame could be crucial. They looked at things like body temperature and rigor mortis to estimate time of death. They checked for any signs of forced entry into Jersey's home. They examined the route between Jersey's house and the vacant property, looking for any evidence that might have been left behind. And then, inevitably, investigators began looking closely at the people closest to Jersey. In homicide investigations, especially those involving children, investigators typically start by looking at family members and close associates. This isn't because police assume family is guilty, but because statistically, children are most often harmed by people they know, by people who have access to them. Strangers abducting and murdering children, while terrifying to think about, is actually relatively rare. The real danger to children most often comes from people who are already in their lives. Detectives interviewed family members, friends of the family, teachers, anyone who had regular contact with Jersey. They looked at Jersey's biological father, at relatives, at anyone who might have had access to the home. And they looked at Zachary Holly, the 28-year-old neighbor who lived just 2 doors down. The man who was married to Jersey's mother's best friend. The man Jersey called Uncle Zach. The man who babysat her regularly. Initially, Zachary Holly might have seemed like just another neighbor to interview, one of many people who lived on that street and might have information relevant to the investigation. But as detectives dug deeper, as they examined his relationship with the family and his access to Jersey, certain facts became impossible to ignore. Zachary had regular, unsupervised access to Jersey. He babysat her frequently. He knew the layout of the family's home. Jersey trusted him implicitly. She would have gone with him willingly if he had come to her in the night. She wouldn't have screamed or fought or resisted. She would have believed she was safe with Uncle Zach. Detectives brought Zachary in for questioning. In the early stages of an investigation, this might be presented as simply gathering information, helping police understand the neighborhood and the people who knew Jersey. But make no mistake, when police interview someone in a homicide investigation, they're doing much more than just collecting information. They're observing behavior, looking for inconsistencies in stories, watching for signs of deception or guilt. They're asking questions designed to elicit specific responses, to see if someone's account of events matches the physical evidence, to determine if someone is being truthful or hiding something. The interview process in a case like this is both an art and a science. Experienced detectives know how to build rapport, how to make someone feel comfortable enough to talk, how to ask questions that seem innocuous but are actually carefully designed to gather crucial information. They know what normal behavior looks like when someone is genuinely trying to help an investigation, and they know what suspicious behavior looks like when someone is hiding guilt. As detectives interviewed Zachary Holly and examined his movements during the critical time period, they also continued processing physical evidence from the crime scene. Forensic specialists were working to extract DNA from biological evidence, to lift fingerprints from surfaces, to analyze any fibers or trace evidence that might connect a suspect to the scene. They were looking at the vacant house where Jersey's body was found, examining it for any evidence of who had been there and what had happened. The forensic analysis in a case like this is incredibly detailed and time-consuming. DNA analysis alone can take days or weeks, depending on the quality of the samples and the backlog at the forensic laboratory. But investigators can't always wait for all the forensic results to come back before making decisions about the direction of their investigation. They have to weigh multiple factors: the physical evidence that's available, the witness statements and interviews, the timeline of events, and their investigative experience and instincts. As the investigation progressed, the evidence began pointing increasingly toward Zachary Holly. The exact nature of that evidence, the specific forensic findings and witness statements, would eventually be revealed in court proceedings. But what became clear to investigators was that Zachary had both the opportunity and the access to commit this crime. The forensic evidence placed him at the scene. His story, whatever version he told investigators, didn't hold up under scrutiny. The pieces were falling into place, and they all pointed to the man Jersey had trusted, the man her mother had trusted, the man who had been welcomed into their home and into their lives. On November 26, 2012, just 6 days after Jersey's body was discovered, Bentonville police arrested Zachary Holly. He was taken into custody and charged with capital murder and kidnapping. Capital murder, in Arkansas, is a charge reserved for the most serious homicides, including the murder of a child under the age of 14. It's a charge that carries the possibility of the death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kidnapping, the unlawful seizure and carrying away of a person against their will, was the second charge, reflecting the fact that Jersey had been taken from her home. The arrest of Zachary Holly sent shockwaves through the Bentonville community and especially through the neighborhood where Jersey had lived. People were stunned. Zachary wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some unknown predator who had somehow infiltrated their community. He was their neighbor. He lived right there among them. His wife was best friends with Jersey's mother. He had been at neighborhood gatherings, at birthday parties, at barbecues. People had waved to him, had conversations with him, considered him just another normal member of their community. The revelation that he was accused of murdering Jersey was devastating in multiple ways. First and most obviously, there was the horror of what had allegedly happened to Jersey, the unthinkable cruelty of a child being murdered by someone she trusted. But there was also the deep betrayal felt by everyone who had known Zachary, who had trusted him, who had allowed their own children to play in his yard or had sent their kids to his house for playdates. How could they have been so wrong about someone? How could they not have seen any warning signs? How could someone capable of such evil have seemed so normal? For Jersey's mother, the betrayal was even more profound. This was her best friend's husband. She had trusted him with her daughter's life. She had allowed him to babysit Jersey, to be alone with her, to be part of her daughter's life in meaningful ways. The guilt that Jersey's mother must have felt, regardless of the fact that she bore no responsibility for Zachary's actions, must have been overwhelming. The what-ifs and second-guessing that are natural human responses to tragedy would have been amplified 1,000 times over. What if she had never moved to that neighborhood? What if she had never become friends with Zachary's wife? What if she had never allowed him to babysit Jersey? Of course, none of these what-ifs change anything, and none of them represent actual choices that Jersey's mother could have known would lead to tragedy, but that doesn't stop the human mind from going down those painful paths of self-blame. For Zachary's wife, the situation was also unimaginably difficult. Her husband had been arrested for murdering her best friend's daughter. The life she thought she had, the person she thought she was married to, had been revealed as a lie. She had to grapple with the possibility, and eventually the reality, that she had been living with a murderer, sleeping next to someone capable of killing a 6-year-old child. Her relationship with Jersey's mother, one of the most important friendships in her life, was shattered. How could that friendship possibly continue when one woman's husband had murdered the other woman's daughter? The legal proceedings that followed Zachary Holly's arrest would unfold over time, following the careful, deliberate pace of the justice system. After his arrest, Zachary was arraigned, meaning he appeared in court to hear the formal charges against him and to enter a plea. In capital murder cases, defendants almost always plead not guilty initially, even if they later change that plea or are found guilty at trial. The not guilty plea sets in motion the pretrial process, where both the prosecution and defense gather evidence, interview witnesses, file motions, and prepare for trial. The prosecution in Jersey's case would have been handled by the Benton County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. Prosecutors in cases like this carry an enormous responsibility. They're not just seeking a conviction, they're seeking justice for a murdered child, and they know that the victim's family is relying on them to hold the perpetrator accountable. They build their case methodically, organizing the evidence, preparing witnesses, anticipating defense strategies, and crafting a narrative that will show a jury exactly what happened and why the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense, meanwhile, has its own constitutional obligations. Even in cases where a defendant's guilt seems obvious, even when public opinion has already judged someone guilty, the defense attorney must provide zealous representation. This is a fundamental principle of our justice system. Everyone accused of a crime deserves a defense, deserves to have the evidence tested, deserves to have the prosecution held to its burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys in cases like Zachary's face enormous public hostility and must balance their ethical obligation to defend their client with the reality that they're defending someone accused of a horrific crime against a child. Pre-trial proceedings in a capital murder case can take months or even years. Both sides engage in discovery, the process by which evidence must be shared between prosecution and defense. The prosecution must turn over all the evidence it has, including anything that might be favorable to the defense. The defense investigates the case from its own perspective, potentially hiring its own forensic experts, interviewing witnesses, and looking for any weaknesses in the prosecution's case. There are also numerous pre-trial motions that get filed in serious criminal cases. The defense might file motions to suppress certain evidence, arguing that it was obtained illegally or should not be admissible at trial. They might file motions to dismiss charges, arguing that there's insufficient evidence to proceed. They might seek a change of venue, arguing that pre-trial publicity has made it impossible to get a fair trial in the local jurisdiction. The prosecution responds to these motions, and the judge rules on them one by one. In Jersey's case, as the legal proceedings moved forward, the community continued to grapple with what had happened. Jersey's mother had to somehow find a way to keep living, to keep functioning, while dealing with grief that most of us cannot even begin to imagine. She had lost her daughter in the most violent, traumatic way possible. She had to see Zachary's face in news reports and court proceedings. She had to relive the details of what happened to Jersey over and over again as the case progressed through the system. She had to exist in a neighborhood where Jersey should have been playing in the yard, going to school, growing up. The vacant house where Jersey's body was found became a grim landmark in the neighborhood, a physical reminder of the tragedy that had occurred. Neighbors probably crossed the street to avoid walking past it. Children were likely told not to go near it. It existed as a wound in the community, a place that could never just be an empty house again but would always be the place where Jersey died. As the case moved toward trial, both sides prepared for what would likely be a difficult and emotional proceeding. The prosecution would present its evidence, the forensic findings that connected Zachary to the crime scene, the timeline showing he had opportunity, the witnesses who could speak to his access to Jersey and his relationship with the family. They would call the medical examiner to testify about Jersey's cause of death. They would walk the jury through what happened that night, painting a picture of a trusted neighbor betraying that trust in the most horrific way imaginable. The defense would present its own case, whatever strategy they had decided upon. In some cases, the defense might argue that the forensic evidence is unreliable or has been misinterpreted. They might suggest alternative suspects, other people who could have committed the crime. They might attack the credibility of prosecution witnesses. They might argue that while their client's actions might seem suspicious, suspicion is not the same as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The specific defense strategy in Zachary's case would depend on the evidence and the defense team's assessment of their best chance at acquittal or at least a hung jury. The trial itself, when it finally occurred, would have been a gut-wrenching experience for everyone involved. Trials in child murder cases are particularly difficult. Jurors have to look at evidence that no one should ever have to see. They have to hear testimony about things that are deeply disturbing. They have to sit in the same room as someone accused of killing a child and maintain their objectivity, weighing the evidence carefully rather than simply acting on the emotion and revulsion that such cases naturally provoke. Jersey's mother would have been in the courtroom, watching the proceedings, listening to the evidence, seeing photos of her daughter, hearing the details of what happened to her. For victims' families, trials can be both a source of hope, the hope that justice will finally be served, and a source of renewed trauma, having to relive the worst moments of their lives in a public setting. The jury in Zachary's case would have been instructed on the law, told what standard of proof the prosecution must meet, and given guidance on how to evaluate the evidence. In a criminal trial, the prosecution must prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard of proof in our legal system. It doesn't mean beyond all possible doubt, because such a standard would be impossible to meet in most cases, but it means that the evidence must be so strong that a reasonable person would not hesitate to rely on it in making important decisions in their own lives. After hearing all the evidence, the closing arguments from both sides, and the judge's instructions, the jury would have deliberated. This is the point where 12 strangers take on the enormous responsibility of deciding another person's fate. They review the evidence together, discuss their interpretations, and work toward a unanimous verdict. In some cases, juries reach a quick verdict, indicating that the evidence was overwhelming one way or another. In other cases, deliberations can last for days or even weeks as jurors carefully consider every aspect of the case. When the jury in Zachary Holly's case returned with their verdict, they found him guilty. The evidence had been sufficient to convince all 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that Zachary Holly had kidnapped and murdered 6-year-old Jersey Bridgeman. The guilty verdict meant that the case would move to sentencing, where the judge would determine what punishment Zachary would receive for his crimes. In capital murder cases, sentencing can be as complex as the trial itself. In some jurisdictions, the same jury that convicted the defendant also makes a recommendation or decision about sentencing. In others, the judge makes that determination. The prosecution might argue for the death penalty or for life without parole. The defense might present mitigating factors, reasons why their client's life should be spared or why they should receive a lesser sentence. Zachary Holly was ultimately sentenced for his crimes. While the specific details of his sentence would be a matter of public record, what's important is that he was held accountable. He was convicted and sentenced for what he did to Jersey. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, never again able to hurt another child, never again able to betray the trust of a family, never again free to live in a community as if he were a normal, safe person. But while Zachary's conviction and sentencing represent a form of justice, they don't undo what happened. They don't bring Jersey back. They don't heal the trauma inflicted on her mother, on the community, on everyone who loved Jersey. Justice in cases like this is cold comfort. It's necessary, it's important, but it's not restoration. It's not healing. It's simply accountability. Jersey Bridgeman was only 6 years old when her life was stolen from her. She had already survived abuse and neglect in her short life. She had been through the foster care system, experiencing instability and uncertainty that no child should have to face. She had finally made it home to her mother. She had finally found what should have been safety and stability in a neighborhood that seemed perfect for a fresh start. She deserved to grow up. She deserved to have a childhood filled with play and learning and joy. She deserved to go to school, to make friends, to discover who she was and who she wanted to be. She deserved to have awkward middle school years and dramatic high school moments. She deserved to fall in love and have her heart broken and fall in love again. She deserved to graduate, to maybe go to college or learn a trade, to find work that fulfilled her. She deserved to travel, to see the world beyond Bentonville, Arkansas. She deserved to make mistakes and learn from them, to have successes and celebrate them. She deserved all the ordinary and extraordinary experiences that make up a human life. Instead, all of that potential, all of that possibility, all of that future was stolen from her by someone she trusted. By someone who should have protected her. By someone who betrayed not just Jersey, but her mother, the entire neighborhood, and the basic social contract that holds communities together, the trust that we should be able to extend to neighbors and friends without fear that they're secretly monsters. Jersey's case is far from unique, and that's perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. Children are harmed by people they know, by people their families trust, far more often than any of us want to acknowledge. Coaches and teachers and clergy members and family friends and relatives and neighbors. The people who have access to children, who build relationships with families, who gain trust over time. These are the people who most often pose the real danger to children, not the stranger in the white van that we warn children about, but the familiar face that seems safe. Jersey's mother did nothing wrong. She didn't fail to protect her daughter. She made the same choices that millions of parents make every day, trusting neighbors, building community, allowing trusted friends to help with childcare. The failure was not hers. The failure was Zachary Holly's, and his alone. He chose to betray that trust. He chose to harm Jersey. He chose to destroy not just one life but the lives of everyone who loved Jersey and the sense of safety and community that the neighborhood had once enjoyed. In the aftermath of Jersey's murder, the neighborhood where she lived was forever changed. The houses look the same. The streets have the same names. But the feeling is different. The innocence is gone. Parents hold their children a little tighter. They're more cautious about who they trust. They're more aware of the dangers that can lurk behind friendly faces. The sense of community that once existed, where neighbors felt comfortable leaving their doors unlocked and children played freely in yards, has been replaced by wariness and suspicion. This is another form of harm that crimes like Jersey's inflict. They destroy the social fabric of communities. They erode trust. They make everyone feel less safe, not just in a vague, general sense, but in a specific, personal way. If Zachary Holly could fool everyone, If he could seem so normal and trustworthy while harboring such evil intentions, then how can anyone trust anyone? How can parents ever feel safe allowing their children to be cared for by anyone else? How can neighbors rebuild the sense of community that was shattered? These are difficult questions without easy answers. We can't live in constant suspicion and fear. We can't lock our children away from the world. We can't stop building communities and forming relationships with neighbors. But we also can't be naive. We can't ignore warning signs. We can't allow the desire for community and the need for childcare and the social pressure to be trusting and friendly to override our instincts when something feels wrong. Jersey's case reminds us of the importance of vigilance, of listening to children when they try to tell us something is wrong, of investigating concerns rather than dismissing them, of taking accusations seriously even when they seem to implicate someone we trust. So many child abuse cases could be prevented or stopped sooner if adults were more willing to believe children, to investigate suspicious behavior, to act on concerns even when it's uncomfortable or socially awkward to do so. There's also the question of what warning signs might have existed with Zachary Holly. In the aftermath of arrests like his, investigators often look back at the person's history, trying to identify red flags that might have been missed. Were there past accusations? Prior concerning behavior? A history of inappropriate interest in children? In many cases, perpetrators of crimes against children have left a trail of warning signs, behaviors that seemed odd or concerning but were never investigated or were dismissed because the person seemed otherwise normal. We don't know the full details of Zachary Holly's background, what his history might have revealed, whether there were previous incidents or concerns that were overlooked or never reported. But what we do know is that he was able to gain access to Jersey, to be alone with her regularly, to establish himself as a trusted figure in her life. And he used that access and that trust to harm her in the most devastating way possible. This pattern is unfortunately common in cases of child abuse and murder. Perpetrators often engage in what's called grooming, not just of the child victim but of the entire family and community. They build trust over time. They make themselves indispensable. They become the helpful neighbor, the reliable babysitter, the trusted friend. They create situations where they have access to children alone. They test boundaries gradually, seeing how far they can go before anyone raises concerns. And they rely on the fact that people don't want to believe that someone they know, someone who seems so normal and helpful, could be capable of harm. The process of grooming is insidious because it's designed to create exactly the situation that makes abuse possible while simultaneously making it difficult for anyone to believe the abuse is happening. By the time the abuse occurs, the perpetrator has built up so much trust, has become so integrated into the family's life, that accusations against them seem almost impossible to believe. Family members find themselves thinking, "But he's been so helpful. But she's been so kind to us. But they would never do something like that." And this disbelief, this cognitive dissonance between what they thought they knew about a person and what they're being told that person has done, often leads to the accusations being dismissed or the victim being doubted. In Jersey's case, there was no opportunity for her to disclose abuse, no chance for her to tell someone what was happening and be believed. Zachary Holly's crime was swift and final. Jersey never had the chance to tell her mother that something was wrong, that Uncle Zach had done something that scared her or hurt her. She never had the chance to ask for help. And that's perhaps one of the most tragic aspects of her case. There was no opportunity for intervention, no moment where someone could have stepped in and saved her. But Jersey's case should still inform how we think about protecting children going forward. We need to create environments where children feel safe disclosing abuse. We need to educate children about appropriate and inappropriate behavior from adults, giving them the language to describe what's happening to them and the confidence that they'll be believed if they speak up. We need to teach them that secrets about touching or behavior that makes them uncomfortable are not secrets they should keep, even if an adult they trust has told them to keep it secret. We also need to educate adults about warning signs of abuse and about how to respond when a child discloses. Too many children who try to tell an adult about abuse are met with disbelief, with dismissal, with responses that shut down the conversation rather than opening it up. Adults need to know that children rarely lie about abuse, that false accusations are extremely uncommon, and that when a child tries to tell you something is wrong, you need to listen, to believe them, and to take action to protect them. There's also the broader question of how we as a society structure childcare and community support in ways that keep children safe. The reality is that most families need help with childcare. Parents work. They have obligations and responsibilities that require their children to be cared for by others. In an ideal world, there would be robust, affordable, professionally operated childcare options available to every family. Childcare workers would be well-trained, well-compensated, and subject to thorough background checks and ongoing supervision. But we don't live in that ideal world. Quality childcare is expensive and often inaccessible. Many families rely on informal arrangements with friends, neighbors, and relatives because they have no other option. This informal childcare network is both necessary and risky. It's necessary because families need support and formal childcare options are limited. It's risky because these informal caregivers aren't subject to the same scrutiny, training, and oversight that professional childcare providers receive. There are no background checks. There's no training in appropriate boundaries and child development. There's no supervision or accountability. Families are essentially trusting people based on their own judgment and the relationship they've built, which is exactly what Jersey's mother did with Zachary Holly. Improving this situation would require significant social investment in childcare infrastructure, in making quality, safe, professional childcare available and affordable to all families. It would require better training and support for parents in identifying warning signs and keeping their children safe. It would require communities to have better systems for vetting and monitoring people who work with children, even in informal capacities. These are complex challenges without simple solutions, but Jersey's case and thousands of cases like it demonstrate why they're so important. Beyond the specific circumstances of childcare, Jersey's case also highlights the vulnerability of children who have already been through trauma. Jersey had been in the foster care system. She had experienced instability and likely abuse or neglect that led to her removal from her original home. Children who have experienced trauma are often more vulnerable to further victimization for several reasons. They may have learned that adults are not safe or trustworthy, which paradoxically can make them less able to identify and avoid dangerous adults. They may be desperate for affection and attention in ways that predators can exploit. They may have learned to comply with adult demands rather than asserting boundaries. They may not have the same sense of what normal, safe adult-child interactions look like. The foster care system and child protective services try to address these vulnerabilities, providing trauma-informed care and working to help children heal and develop healthy relationships. But the system is overwhelmed and underfunded. Social workers carry impossible caseloads. Foster families often lack the training and support they need to address complex trauma. And once children are reunified with their biological families, as Jersey was with her mother, ongoing support and monitoring may be limited or non-existent. Jersey's mother was doing her best to provide a stable, loving home for her daughter. But she was also probably dealing with her own challenges, whether financial stress, the demands of single parenthood, or other issues that made having a helpful neighbor like Zachary Holly seem like a blessing. She had no way of knowing that the person she trusted with her daughter was a danger. She had no reason to suspect that the man who seemed so kind and helpful had evil intentions. The guilt that Jersey's mother must carry, despite the fact that she bears no responsibility for Zachary's actions, is unimaginable. Parents of murdered children often struggle with overwhelming guilt, replaying every decision they made, torturing themselves with what-ifs. What if I had checked on her one more time that night? What if I had never moved to that neighborhood? What if I had never allowed him to babysit? What if I had sensed something was wrong? These thoughts, while natural, are based on the false premise that Jersey's mother could have somehow predicted or prevented what Zachary did. She couldn't. No reasonable person could have anticipated that a seemingly normal neighbor would murder a child. But knowing intellectually that she bears no responsibility doesn't stop the emotional torment of losing a child and feeling like you should have somehow protected them. Jersey's mother has to live with not just the grief of losing her daughter, but also the trauma of how she lost her, the betrayal by someone she trusted, the violation of her home and her sense of safety. She has to wake up every day in a world without Jersey, knowing that her daughter's life was stolen, that Jersey will never grow up, never have the experiences and opportunities she deserved. Grief after the murder of a child is different from other types of grief. It's not just the loss, it's the violence and injustice of it. It's not just that Jersey is gone, it's that someone chose to take her life, that her death was preventable, that it should never have happened. This type of grief is often complicated by anger, by a need for justice and accountability, by a sense that the world is fundamentally unsafe and unjust. It can be paralyzing and all-consuming in ways that make it difficult to function, to maintain relationships, to find any sense of normalcy or peace. Families of murdered children often find that their grief is disenfranchised or misunderstood. People may offer platitudes that feel hollow or offensive. They may expect the family to move on or find closure after a trial or conviction, not understanding that there is no moving on from the murder of your child, no closure that makes it okay. They may grow uncomfortable with ongoing grief, with the family's need to talk about their lost child, with the intensity of emotion that continues years after the murder. This can leave families feeling isolated and unsupported in their grief. Jersey's mother deserves ongoing support and compassion. She deserves a community that remembers Jersey, that speaks her name, that acknowledges the magnitude of what was lost. She deserves access to trauma-informed therapy and grief support. She deserves to be able to talk about Jersey for the rest of her life without people growing uncomfortable or suggesting it's time to move on. Because you never move on from the murder of your child. You learn to carry it. You learn to function despite it. But it never goes away. Jersey will always be the daughter who was taken too soon. The grief will always be there. The community where Jersey lived also experienced a form of collective trauma. When a child is murdered in a neighborhood, it shatters everyone's sense of safety. Parents become hypervigilant, perhaps overly restrictive with their children. Kids sense the fear and anxiety even if they don't fully understand what happened. The neighborhood becomes known as the place where that terrible thing happened. Property values may drop as people decide they want to live somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't carry that association. Communities can heal from trauma, but it requires intentional effort. It requires people coming together to support each other, to process what happened, to rebuild a sense of safety and connection. It requires acknowledging the harm that was done while also finding ways to move forward. Some communities create memorials for victims, places where people can gather to remember and grieve. Some organize community events focused on child safety and abuse prevention. Some simply make efforts to reconnect with neighbors, to rebuild the sense of community that was damaged. In Jersey's case, we can hope that her community found ways to heal and to honor her memory. Perhaps there's a playground named after her, or a scholarship fund, or a memorial bench somewhere. Perhaps her birthday is remembered each year with an event focused on protecting children. Perhaps local organizations received donations in her name to fund programs that keep kids safe. These gestures don't undo what happened, but they ensure that Jersey is remembered as more than just a victim, that her life meant something beyond the tragedy of her death. Now, years after Jersey's murder, after Zachary Holly's conviction and sentencing, the acute crisis has passed but the long-term impacts remain. Jersey's mother continues to live without her daughter. The community continues to carry the knowledge of what happened in their neighborhood. Zachary Holly sits in prison, where he will remain for the rest of his life. And Jersey herself exists now only in memories, in photographs, in the hearts of people who loved her. This is the reality of cases like Jersey's. There's no happy ending. There's no way to make it right. A child is dead. A family is destroyed. A community is traumatized. Justice has been served in the form of a conviction and sentence, but that justice doesn't resurrect the victim or heal the wounds. It simply ensures that the perpetrator is held accountable and cannot harm anyone else. If this case has touched you, if Jersey's story matters to you, I need you to do something. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss our investigations into cases like Jersey's. Second, smash that like button to help this story reach more people who care about justice for victims. And third, leave a comment below. Tell us what case you want us to investigate next. Tell us your thoughts on how we can better protect children. Tell us that Jersey's story mattered to you. Share this video on your social media so more people hear Jersey's name and remember her life. Together, we keep these cases alive. Together, we demand justice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Together, we work to prevent future tragedies by learning from past ones. Jersey Bridgeman deserved so much better than what happened to her. She deserved to grow up safe and loved. She deserved to have all the experiences of childhood and adolescence and adulthood that were stolen from her. She deserved to live in a world where the people trusted to care for her actually kept her safe. She deserved a life full of possibility and joy, not one cut short by violence and betrayal. We cannot give Jersey back her life. We cannot undo the harm that was done to her. But we can remember her. We can tell her story. We can use her case to educate others about the realities of child abuse and the importance of vigilance. We can advocate for better protection for vulnerable children. We can support families who have experienced similar tragedies. We can work to create a world where cases like Jersey's become increasingly rare because we've built better systems to protect children and to identify and stop predators before they can harm. This is why Cold Case Crime Lab exists. Not just to tell stories of tragedy, but to ensure that victims are remembered, that their cases receive attention, that justice is pursued even when it's difficult or delayed. Every case we cover represents a real person whose life mattered, whose death deserves to be investigated and explained, whose family deserves answers and accountability. Jersey Bridgeman was 6 years old. She liked to play and laugh and explore the world around her, just like any other 6-year-old. She had favorite toys and favorite foods. She had dreams about what she wanted to be when she grew up. She had a personality, a sense of humor, likes and dislikes that made her unique. She was not just a victim. She was a person, a child, a daughter. And she deserved to live. Her murder was not inevitable. It was a choice made by Zachary Holly, a choice that he alone is responsible for. He chose to betray the trust of a family that welcomed him. He chose to harm a child who called him uncle. He chose to commit an act of violence that destroyed multiple lives and traumatized an entire community. And he was held accountable for those choices through our justice system. But accountability after the fact doesn't prevent tragedy. We need to be proactive about protecting children. We need to create systems and cultures that make it harder for predators to access victims. We need to believe children when they try to tell us something is wrong. We need to investigate concerns thoroughly rather than dismissing them because they implicate someone we like or trust. We need to provide better support for vulnerable children and families so that they're not dependent on potentially dangerous informal arrangements for basic needs like childcare. These are complex challenges that require sustained effort and resources. But they're challenges we must face if we want to prevent future tragedies like Jersey's. Every child deserves to be safe. Every family deserves to be able to trust the people in their community. Every neighborhood deserves to be a place where children can grow up without fear. Jersey Bridgeman's life was cut short, but her story continues. It continues in the memory of those who loved her. It continues in the work of organizations dedicated to preventing child abuse. It continues in conversations like this one, where we refuse to look away from difficult truths and instead commit ourselves to learning from tragedy and working to prevent future harm. As we conclude this investigation into Jersey's case, I want you to take a moment to think about the children in your own life. Your kids, your nieces and nephews, your students, the children in your neighborhood. Think about how you can help keep them safe. Think about what warning signs you should be watching for. Think about how you would respond if a child tried to tell you something was wrong. Think about what systems and policies you can support that would better protect vulnerable children. And remember Jersey. Remember that she was a real little girl with hopes and dreams and a future that should have been bright. Remember that her death was preventable. Remember that we all have a responsibility to protect children, not just our own children but all children in our communities. Remember that vigilance and awareness and willingness to act on concerns can save lives. This is Cold Case Crime Lab, where we investigate cases that demand justice, where we tell the stories of victims who deserve to be remembered, where we refuse to let tragedy fade into obscurity. Jersey Bridgeman's case is closed in the legal sense. Her killer was caught, convicted, and sentenced. But her story remains open in the sense that we continue to learn from it, to be affected by it, to let it motivate us to do better at protecting children. Thank you for watching this investigation. Thank you for caring about Jersey's story. Thank you for being part of this community that values justice and remembers victims. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Like this video to help it reach more people. Comment below with your thoughts and with suggestions for future investigations. Share this video on your social media to spread awareness of Jersey's case and the importance of protecting children. Together, we are a community dedicated to justice. Together, we remember victims and hold perpetrators accountable. Together, we work toward a future where tragedies like Jersey's become increasingly rare because we've learned the lessons that cases like hers teach us. Rest in peace, Jersey Bridgeman. You were taken from this world far too soon, but you will never be forgotten. Your life mattered. Your story matters. And the lessons we learn from your case will help protect other children, ensuring that your death was not entirely in vain. This is Cold Case Crime Lab. Justice never sleeps. And neither do we.